humans were hunters and gatherers, one with nature as they roamed the earth with fertile soil and copious quantities of grain.
As humans developed, so did our civilizations, transforming into the ancient empires such as the Roman Empire and Chinese dynasties. Several centuries later, society changed progressively to what we see today.
What all these eras of humankind have in common is forms of punishment to deter people from committing crimes. The death penalty is the legal punishment of particular crimes by death at Cambridge University.
In the United States, we refer to the death penalty as capital punishment, and it's legal in 27 states today.
However, the death penalty is an inherently racist system, rooted in lynching of the 1930s, and in the racial disparity that exists within its modern day.
Today, we'll be discussing the possible pros and cons, the history, and how to have a healthy discussion with a parent, guardian, or trusted adult figure. The death penalty has many drawbacks. The most notable, and the one that we will be primarily focusing on, is its racial disparity.
We can see an example of racial disparity in a study published by Mona Lynch and Craig Haney. Researchers surveyed jurors in a mock trial in which the defendant had already been found guilty but needed to reach a sentencing decision. They found that the picture of capital jury decision-making that emerged from the study is complex and disturbing. The interrelated effects of race and instructional incomprehension had significant effects on the penalty phase decision-making process and outcome. Lynch and Haney, 2000.
This piece of evidence shows how many Black people are disproportionately sentenced due to discrimination based on race. Many Americans believe that the death penalty deters crimes, but there hasn't been any evidence to link the two. According to a paper published by Haydar Aviram and Ryan Newby, several death penalty scholars have since concluded that the death penalty has in fact no deterrent effect.
If you think about it, our jail system is not deterring any crimes. Who says that the death penalty would either? Let's see how we can correct someone with this misconception.
Hey, Uncle Joe.
I'm Betty. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Did you see what happened on the news earlier?
I did, yeah. That one guy who got the death penalty.
I know, it's terrible stuff.
Well, I don't know about that. I always thought the death penalty was pretty good at deterring crime.
Well, I'd have to disagree to Uncle Joe. According to a paper from Hader Averman and Ryan Newby, they found that the death penalty doesn't deter anything compared to other punishments, such as a life sentence.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and other scholars and other researchers also back up this claim that it doesn't deter anything. Yeah.
Well, you learn something new every day.
Yeah.
The death penalty can be seen since some of the earliest human civilizations. One could argue that this represents a moral and ethical dilemma humans face regarding what can be considered proper retribution for one's crimes. Therefore, we can see a reoccurring pattern in human civilization of societies, adopting capital punishment practices to seek to fully punish criminals of the law. American society is no exception to this pattern.
The death penalty in American history can be traced all the way back to our colonial roots. After all, our British rulers were no strangers to executions of any kind. Interestingly, as we developed as a nation, states still held on to this death penalty policies as other countries moved towards no longer allowing capital practices. Of course, we must also consider the history of the death penalty outside of the law.
Barbara Smith writes, "The execution of Black men for allegedly raping white women is a defining characteristic of the history of race relations in the South. In the years between the Civil War and the early 1930s, these executions often took the form of extra-legal lynchings in which Black men were burned, shot, or hung by mobs of whites. Lynching served primarily as a means to control Black people in a white supremacist culture. Lynching, though, began to die out as a primary means of social control around 1930. But the demise of lynching did not end the Southern practice of executing Blacks accused of raping white women. The electric chair and the gas chamber of the criminal justice system replaced the rope and F-slur of the mob."
According to a journal by Rebecca Bork, 49% of executions from 1930 to 1960 were Black. This led to the 1972 Supreme Court case Furman v. Georgia, in which the Supreme Court ruled the death penalty was cruel and unusual. This led to the 1972 Supreme Court case Furman v. Georgia, in which the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment due to racial discrimination. Changes were made to help prevent race discrimination in future cases through guided description statuses. However, research shows that racism in the death penalty sentencing still prevails. It's important to know the history behind the death penalty because of its racist roots and how they still affect our legal system today. Here's a conversation between two people about the history of the death penalty.
Good morning, class. I'm Professor Mama. So I want you all to call me Joe. So today's first lesson is going to be talking about the death penalty in ancient Rome. Now, most forms of capital punishment involve long, continuous hours of torture, such as the bronze bull. Thankfully, today we don't use such cruel forms of punishment anymore. Instead, our capital punishment is much more pain-free and quick. Yes.
Mr. Mama.
Please call me Joe.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Joe, I have a question.
And what's your question?
Do you really think that our capital punishment is much more humane these days?
Well, sure, it's much more equal, and it doesn't target any specific people, and it's very quick and painless.
How can you say that when the history of the death penalty was originally rooted in lynchings of black men, according to Barbara Smith?
Well, I don't know. I never really thought about it.
Yeah. And also, on a journal by Rebecca Bort, said that 49% of those executed from 1930 to 1960 were black men. So it sounds like it's targeting black men, and that's not really humane or ethical.
When you put it like that, yeah, I guess you could say that. So you taught me something new.
Thanks, Mr. Joe.
Now that we have analyzed the history of the death penalty and assessed the negative qualities it contains, some might conclude that capital punishment is an inherently racist practice that should be abolished in America.
As a younger generation, it's important to be informed and let your voice be heard. I'd recommend checking out the ACLU Race and Death Penalty document in Britannica's webpage about the death penalty. If you're wanting to learn more, if you find that this is an issue you feel strongly or passionate about, you might turn towards some trusted adult figures in your life to hear their views. You might find that they do not share your views.
Do not panic. People are allowed to hold opinions contrary to your own. However, you are also allowed to hold opinions contrary to theirs. If you feel comfortable enough to engage in a conversation to better understand their views, absolutely do so.
Ask them what they believe the pros and cons of the death penalty are. Take this opportunity to educate them if you can spot false beliefs that they may hold based off the facts you have learned from this guide. For instance, if they happen to mention that capital punishment serves as a deterrent to crime, we can confidently correct this once.
It's important to know that you might not change the other person's mind in this conversation, but at least you can let your voice be heard. Now let's see a sample conversation that we might have with a trusted adult figure in our life.
Oh, hey, someone's back from school.
Hi, Dad.
How was it?
Hey, it was great. I love 7th grade.
And what'd you learn?
Well, I learned about the death penalty.
And what'd you learn about it?
Well, I learned that it's pretty racist.
Racist? I
Yeah.
don't know about that. How's it racist?
Well,
You might be panicking right now, but calm yourself, take a deep breath, and think about those facts you learned in history class.
well, I learned that a lot of people were killed, primarily black men, because people would say that they were raping white women. And so, before the death penalty was really used, it was lynching and drowning and burning. So when that became illegal to do so, our government turned towards more legal means of getting rid of black men. And so they used the death penalty.
Interesting. I never really thought about it like that before.
Yeah, it kind of opened my eyes, Dad.
That's good. I'm liking that school that we're sending you to.
It's important to have these discussions and make your voice be heard. At the end of the day, you may not change someone's opinion, but at least your voice is being heard.